So, hello, Boker Tov. This is Rabbi Johnny Solomon, and I'm thrilled to be joined here with Kira Sirote, who is the author of Haftorah Unrolled. It's a wonderful book. There you go, not in front of my face.
I
And
got
what
one
we're
too.
going to, that's your copy with the mask. And what we're going to do in this session is just talk a little with Kira about who she is, her journey, her ideas, her book, and perhaps even share an insight or two from it, either relating to the parsha or any other upcoming parsha or festival. So,
Mm.
can you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Sure. Actually, you know what? If you don't mind, can I do that by way of the dedication that I have to my book? Because it gives you an insight.
It's a very
It's a
beautiful
story.
dedication, by the way. I've read it, and it's very moving. So,
Okay, so I usually start when I speak about my book because it is dedicated to the memory of my parents. And I think it gives you a bit of, it's a good introduction as well to myself. So I'm originally from the former Soviet Union. I was born in '69 and we left there in '79. So that was the height of the oppressive regime. And not only I, but also my parents grew up knowing nothing about any kind of Yiddishkeit. It was illegal to study Hebrew. It was illegal to have any Hebrew books in the house. If you were caught or somebody informed on you, you'd be interrogated, you could be jailed. And likewise with Jewish holidays, I once heard from my grandmother, it's Hanukkah, I wish I could give you Hanukkah gelt. I had no idea what that meant. Um, and that was it. That was the extent of our education. It was dangerous. So we were given permission to leave, and in 1979 we in fact left. And our journey was arranged by the HIAS, Hebrew Immigrant Aid Society, and they arranged way stations for us along the way. Our first stop in the free world was in Vienna. And
yes.
in Vienna, yeah, beautiful place. I've actually been back there since. Very fond memories. Yes, because it was like the Wizard of Oz, where all of a sudden it turns color. So that was very much my experience of it. All of a sudden we had food, but in addition to that, so they provided us with a place to stay, which we shared with other families, and a little bit of a stipend for food. And one of the things they gave us was a Bible in Russian. Now, we've never seen a Bible before, and because it was illegal. So my mother had this habit that when she'd get a new book, she wouldn't start at the beginning. She'd go like this to the middle somewhere, read a little bit. If she liked it, she'd go back to the beginning.
In all books, not just Tanakh.
All books, all books. Truth is, I do that also sometimes. The author sometimes puts a little bit more effort in the first chapter and then they drop it. So, any case, yeah, it's true. In any case, so she opened it up at random. She opened it up at random, and this is the first verse that caught her eye. I'm going to say it in English. I will say to the north, give over, and to the south, do not restrain. Bring my sons from afar and my daughters from the ends of the earth. This is in Yeshayahu. It happens to be the Haftorah of Breshit. So I will say to the north, give over. And she looked at it and she said, well, that happened. You know. So so she actually did go back to the beginning of the book and read the whole thing, as did I, for that matter, because lack of reading material in her journey. Um, Excuse me. So ultimately, just to continue with my part of the story, we moved to the United States. I grew up in Far Rockaway and then in Lawrence in the Five Towns. I went to Hafter. My parents were actually very brave to send me to Hafter because I mean, despite our experience, the indoctrination, the Soviet indoctrination is very, very strong. And if you're taught that intelligent people are not religious and religious people are not intelligent, and of course, as Jews, we're intelligent, it makes for a lot of cognitive dissonance there. It's very, very hard. But my mother said they took our traditions, our heritage, away from us by force, and we're going to bring it back. So they sent us to the Jewish schools, my sister and myself, and we learned. Now, I came in at 10 years old, not knowing maybe how to count to 10 in English and no Hebrew, so I had to catch up. and eventually I did catch up. And my further Jewish studies were in Michlala, um, and also in university I had the privilege of learning from a rabbi, Professor Yitzchak Twersky, Zichrono Livracha. And I really, even though I was only there for a semester, I believe that his precision in words is something that I attempt to, I don't know, emulate isn't even a good word. now, now I'm at a lack of words.
I know that you mentioned him in your introduction, and you just expressed how English wasn't your first language. I have to say, and when reading Haftorah Unrolled, you have a really, really rich vocabulary, meaning you describe things in ways and with words that oftentimes give nuance that other words wouldn't be able to achieve. And that reflectiveness about language, I think, is an essential quality in your scholarship. Obviously, it's not the sum total of your scholarship, but a great vocabulary helps a reader understand what is your reader.
I very much appreciate you saying that. Well, I mean, English isn't my first language technically, but it is my main and strongest language right now. I guess I really should say I don't like talking about this, but being that I mentioned Professor Twersky, I studied with Professor Twersky at Harvard. Yes, so my language was quite up to par. I also studied linguistics, but the truth is that was very much my intention. Yeshayahu is beautifully written. It is not meant to be archaic. And when I translated, it was very, very important to me to try to convey as much of what he would have wanted using current English. Now, 100 years ago, English was different. 50 years ago, English was different. Truth is, 50 years from now, it's also going to be different. But I could at least capture for the audience that lives here now as much of the connotations as I possibly can. And of course, every time I open the book and read it, I say, oh, I translated that way. Damn, I should have. Still,
but nevertheless,
it is what it is.
Even when I look at it, and this, I have a certain amount of books near our Shabbos table, and this is one of them, and that means I bring to Shabbos table quite regularly, and I'm struck by the richness of language, and I'm moved by it by that way. It demonstrates a real interest in seeking to capture the tone, the spirit, the frustrations, the emotions, the pathos of what's taking place in any given prophecy or observation or teaching that we have in Nach.
Yes, thank you. I really, really appreciate hearing that. That was my intention. I worked very, very hard on it. And well, something like this week's parsha is probably, it was one of the hardest, if not the hardest. Hosea. But I guess we could talk about that later. But
back to that in a second. Yeah.
Yeah. But the truth is, I mean, so after that, I learned on Matan since I made Aliyah. So I've been learning consistently Tanakh, Medrash, and Halacha as well. But Tanakh is my absolute, it's the thing that speaks to the most, my passion. I guess I should mention by profession, I'm a software developer. And that's what I do for a living, full time. And also I have 7 children who are mostly grown, and four grandchildren, Baruch Hashem, K'nai Nahar. This is where you say I'm too young to be a grandmother.
I'm just about to get to that bit.
Right.
Firstly, I thought you were young anyway, so now how could that even be?
How could that even be? Thank you.
You did say the problem is you told me when you were born, right?
Right. Oh, damn. Next.
We'll
next time.
That bit out, okay?
Yeah. Fine. Okay.
Interestingly, and you mentioned you're a software developer, and I was talking about rich language, and I wouldn't necessarily think that those are using a similar skill set, right? One is about, shall we say, structure and code, and often using very, very concise, but not necessarily rich language. And one is, I wouldn't say that this is extensive. In fact, you pack a big punch sometimes in quite small, what was, I think, originally blog posts, and then you expand and then wrote these wonderful small essays on each haftarah. But what's the relationship between those two parts of your life?
Okay. Well, first of all, okay. Before the first of all, part A is people have more than one facet. Yes. But it's actually a misapprehension about my field. Software development, we write for other people. We don't write for the machine.
Okay.
Yes. Our biggest challenge is how to write very complicated things in a way that 3, 5, 10 years from now, someone's going to read and understand what you were trying to accomplish. That is our greatest challenge. One of the hardest things to do, in fact, is how to name functions. Do this, this, and this, right? And if you're not good at that, then your code will be less readable, and later on, somebody else won't be able to. It's very much about the communication. So yes,
communication, yes. Language, yes. But rich language, I wasn't sure. But thank you for enlightening me, because it's a very, very interesting question of writing not just for the present but also for the future. And as you say, really, that's what Tanakh is.
Yes.
Anything in the Tanakh wasn't just timely; it was timeless. It's meant to be speaking to us today. Our failing, and we're going to get to translation soon, is when you write a translation, often you're using timely translations of timeless biblical words.
We don't have much choice in that. We only have the language that we have. Right. I think the mistake is the other direction, is saying, oh, if I make it sound archaic, it's somehow going to be more timeless. And I don't think that's true. I don't think that doesn't work. But yes, the Tanakh is speaking to us. That was the lesson that I got from my mother. That you open it up and it is literally speaking to me right now. Right. And the rest of the verse also came true, because ultimately I made Aliyah, my sister made Aliyah, and my parents made Aliyah, and they got to enjoy their 11 grandchildren speaking Hebrew and celebrating all the holidays in joy in Eretz Yisrael. And so, Yeshayahu was right.
Yeshayahu was right. Just for you to know, I am midway through writing a curricula about Ethiopian Jewish heritage. And just yesterday, I sent some of the material off, and the first makor, first 2 makor on that daf are from Sefer Yeshayahu, because those psukim in Parak Aleph, Chaf Zayin, if I recall, those psukim are central to that yearning for returning, right? And I actually said more than those in Israel hoped that those in exile returned. We can definitely say the Bet Israel community took those words to heart and lived those words in every single aspect of what they did. And they are not just a living repository of Jewish practice, but also a living reflection of the timelessness of the words and power of the prophets.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, and then if you're talking about something like the Shevet de Nechemta, which we're not, I mean, we're not in the summer, but when it talks about the pain that the Jewish people are feeling, the comfort has to be specific to the pain. So right, you're not going to just say, oh, one day Mashiach will come and everything's going to be great, or God has a plan. I mean, it's nice to know God has a plan, but if you're trying to comfort somebody, you address the actual pain. You'll talk about, the fear that God has abandoned us, and you'll talk, that's a different lecture that I have. But the problem is, though, I mean, the thing with the Haftorahs is they're very much, they're very challenging. Now, at one point, I decided to, I was a little bit between things, and I was a little bit frustrated, and my husband said, why don't you go teach?
Right.
I said, right, okay. So I said, oh, if I'm going to teach something, it's going to be the Haftorahs. Why the Haftorahs? Because I felt personally a lack. I'd go to shul and not understand what was happening, and that is not a feeling I enjoy. In fact, due to my background in particular, it's not a feeling that I enjoy, because I had to catch up very, very quickly, and I don't like the feeling that I'm missing something. You know, so I said, okay, if I'm going to teach something, I'm going to teach something that I don't know, because that's the best way to learn.
Sure.
So I spent a year preparing, mostly on Rabbi Beryl Wine tapes. He's the Rav of the community that my husband grew up in, and he went to a school, and we're in touch with him, and he has been a tremendous supporter of my work in a very real sense. I mean, it says
He wrote a beautiful forward. It's very, very moving.
right, he brought us comment a forward, and he wrote it like the day I asked him. Like it took me after he wrote it, it took me 3 years to get this thing out, and he had it like that day. And so yeah, there's a heavy influence as well in terms of the approach we take. That yes, this is talking to us, and he also has a way of putting it in modern terms. So that's part of what my background comes from, in that. And then I started teaching it as a class in my parents' home, like from the shul, like the shul announced, and this week's class on the Haftorah will take place at the Rosenberg residence, etc. And what I wanted to do, now my parents, they caught up in English, they did not catch up in the Hebrew, as well as some other people in the community. And I said, I'm going to have to translate. And I said, well, what I want to do is I want to have a linear translation, phrase by phrase, kind of like the linear Rashi we grew up with. You know what I'm referring to? Yes, love that, right? So, so I said, okay, well, what I want to do is I want to take the psukim apart. I want to present them as poetry, because it is, right? And then, and I want to divide them by the Tamei Mikra, because that's the punctuation that the Tanakh itself has.
Sure.
Right. So, so I started doing that, and I said, oh, but I was going to, copy somebody's translation for this class, and I said, well, there is no phrase by phrase translation of all of the Haftorahs. I should say, for the record, I think there is one that is used in shuls from a number of years ago, different generation. So it's not entirely that there's nothing, but for the most part, it's not. So I translated it myself, and then that's when I said, okay, if I'm going to translate, it's going to be modern, current English. I don't want to say modern. Modern a week from now is not modern. So it's going to be the best English that I could muster to convey what the prophet has, because we already said it's Hosea meant to be poetic but not archaic, and those are two different things.
Right.
Right. So so every week I would have a translation line by line, word table, and I did that, and then of course because it was a live lecture, the other challenge that people have with Haftorah, after you understand the words, assuming you understand the words, and in Nevi'im Rishonim, it's not always that hard. The other challenge is knowing where the heck you are in Jewish history. Like, so the parsha goes in order: Avram, Yitzchak, Yaakov, etc. Right? So it's a story and you follow it. That's not true for the Haftorah at all. Last week we were in Malachi. The week before that we were with David HaMelech. This week we're in Hosea in the Northern Kingdom. The Haftorah has the first parak of Nevi'im in Yoshua, parak Aleph, as the last parak of Nevi'im in Lachi Gimel. That's the Haftorah of Shabbat HaGadol, and that covers about 850 years of Jewish history.
Right.
And you don't know week to week where it's going to drop you, like in the middle of a story, literally in the middle of a story, like Machar Chodesh. David says to Yonatan, Machar, tomorrow's Rosh Chodesh. What was yesterday? What are they talking about? What are their challenges? What's the backstory? So one of the things that I present in the book is an introduction to tell you where you are and who the characters are, what their issues are, and if in case of prophecy, who the audience is, what their challenges are, what kind of society they're living in. This was absolutely crucial in this week. Yeah.
Right, so for those who are watching, presumably we're able to share this video, I do want to point out this section, because in fact for every Haftarah you have three things. One is this historical context, a beautifully written introduction giving a sense of who's speaking, what's taking place at the time. Then you've mentioned these beautiful translations phrase by phrase, written by you, with actually some helpful interpretive elements in between in those grey boxes, meaning you're helping me understand things, but you're not saying that that's translation. And then at the end of every Haftarah, you have these, so I'm just putting it a little bit closer to the camera, a short essay explaining the connection between the Haftarah and the parasha. Now, when you were speaking beforehand, it hit me that of all the people of the last, at least in my lifetime, who's made a strong endeavor to bring back a love and understanding of Jewish history into the Orthodox world has been Rabbi Wein. I mean, he basically felt that we have this rich history, and yet we seem to not talk enough about it, to our peril. And as you know, he's written many, many books about Jewish history. So I don't know whether it was almost accidental that these shurim were taking place originally through that association, or whether his ideas and passion for Jewish history kindled already a passion of yours, which led you to write Haftorah Unrolled.
Both, of course. It's not a coincidence. No, I mean he's been a part of my life and my education for of our family almost since I met my husband, and we met when we were quite young. So so yes, I very much see him as a mentor, and the importance of history cannot be understated, and the importance of understanding the context of the political and social context is often crucial in understanding what the Navi is saying. I mean, especially this week, I think is a prime example of that, because he's I mean, we kind of grew up, used to, prophets saying, oh, the prophets saying Jewish people are bad. Okay, fine, they're bad. But it's not, there's specific criticisms that we could learn from if we understand who he's talking to, and if we understand, if we share any of the same social elements, any of the same attitudes that they did.
You're referring specifically to Hosea, who's the Haftarah for this week's Parasha Vayetze is taken from Hosea. Is that right?
Yes, that's right. So it's taken from Hosea. This is Hosea is the hardest to translate. He really is. It, like there are plays on words and there are expressions, but it takes place in the northern kingdom of Yisrael and not in Yehuda. We often, unless like I say, unless you're an expert in Tanakh and you really understand Melachim and Devarim, you're not gonna know who he's talking to. But he's actually speaking to a society that is very wealthy and prosperous and not so very honest. So it took me a full page. Usually, I mean, I don't want people to think it's going to be a page every time. Sometimes it's just this much, right? Right. But I really needed to give back. Hosea is addressing Ephraim. Ephraim, you are bad at this, and you don't. Ephraim, what's Ephraim, Menashe, Ephraim to Menashe? What are our associations? So you have to actually understand that Ephraim is the name of the northern kingdom, and what they were doing at the time and who they were like, and then we can learn from that. If you don't know, then it's just random Jews are bad.
Interesting thing, if you don't know Nach, you have often a very, very small window into biblical personality. I'll just give you a random example. I have family who live not too far from where you live, just outside of Kfar Saba, and that means for many, many years I've kind of frequented that area, and there is Kever Binyamin. So on a number of occasions I've been to Kever Binyamin in a random spot between Kfar Saba and Kochav Yair, and I remember the first time I went there, I actually was very aggrieved with myself, because I said, I'm standing at Kever Binyamin, and what do I know about Binyamin? I know a couple of stories, and that's it, because at that point, my knowledge of Nach, not it's so great now, but now it's slightly better. At that point, it was almost nothing. And a lack of familiarity about biblical personalities and their spiritual legacy, right? Their family legacy, means that it's hard to relate even to the kever of one of the Shiftei Ka, which is just crazy.
I hope I don't disappoint you by saying that it is incredibly unlikely that Benjamin was buried anywhere near there, or
Yeah,
in
you're
Eretz
not
Israel at all.
disappointed. The truth is, we have this with a number of Kvarim. I'm well aware
But
of that.
this one's particularly egregious because it's not in the Chalad Binyamin.
Uh-huh.
Sorry. But yeah, I mean, we have to, that is, but you know what, this is true, but we can't expect people to be experts in Tanakh, right? But yet, every week you show up to shul and you listen to the Haftorah as if you're an expert in Tanakh.
Right.
And it's just unfair. It makes people, the people who came to my class were in their 70s and 80s. It was
With your friends of your parents.
for people in our shul. It was actually a couple shir, which was very sweet. Around the table, you don't have to have separate learning if it's just a small thing around the table. And there were people who'd been to shul their whole entire lives, and they really very much appreciated actually understanding what it was they were saying. And I've gotten that feedback actually from friends, from people who have bought the book and are using it, and they say, finally, I understand what's happening. Finally, I'm 90 years old, and I understand what's happening, from the father of a friend of ours. And this is true, by the way, this is true regardless of background. There are people who are, let's say, I have a very dear uncle, distant uncle, who is a conservative Jew, a very, very dedicated conservative Jew, and they read my book and they love it. And away on the other side of the spectrum of people who might be hearing the Haftorah, a family member of mine, grandfather-in-law, is a shtickle Talmid Chacham, in the Haredi world, living in Har Nof, and his wife calls my mother-in-law to tell her how much he enjoys my book, and he's very picky. He doesn't like just Tamahiri, because again, unless you're an expert in Tanakh, you don't know, and it's not fair that people should feel lost. It's not fair. It's not the intention.
It's a book which not only in the introduction but across the whole of your essays, you are humble, meaning this is a great expression of your great scholarship, but you make the book not about you. You focus the attention on the messages, on the Nevi'im, and on what we can draw from them. And
Right.
I think there are a lot of books in which the author tries to put themselves front and center. This is where you're trying to put our heritage front and center, and through your skills, you do that with grace and I think nuance, which is very much appreciated as a reader.
Well, thank you very much. I mean, my motto in this is I'm not making this up, right? And then that actually ends up being a little bit challenging when it came to the second part of what I've done, in addition to the translation and making you comfortable and understanding what's going on in the Haftorah. There's the perennial question, right? Why, of all the prakim and all of Nevi'im, as I mentioned, covering 850 years and a lot of, 20, a whole bunch of books, why this for this parsha, right? That's the question. And then, and there are other people who've addressed it. For the record, I didn't read any other books on the Haftorah while I was working on this because of the fear that I would subconsciously use somebody else's work. So I didn't. Sometimes you'll find, let's say, the art scroll who, they'll have one line. Let's say, I remember seeing Chaya Sarah, no, not Chaya Sarah, excuse me, Vayera, that it says, there's hospitality here and there's hospitality there. That's the connection. Okay, very nice, but what does that, why? What is, okay, there's hospitality. How does that make a connection? Also, there are many, many other connections. So I didn't want it to be shallow. I wanted it to be meaningful. And I used a few different skills that I've learned throughout my, my education. One of them is Midrash. And it's, the choice of the Haftorah is actually one of the earliest commentaries that we have on the Parsha, because it goes way back. Some of them are mentioned in the Mishnah. Certainly by the time of the Rishonim was pretty much, I mean, obviously the Parsha division is kind of on the later side, but it's, you know, from the time of Chazal for sure. So it's and one of the questions I try to ask myself is, in fact, okay, what do we learn about the Parsha from the Haftorah? Right, not just the connection as a connection. What is, you know, what is putting together these two different perspectives actually, you know, it gives us a different facet that we wouldn't otherwise have thought of. So one of the things I would do is use the medrash, and it was not rare for me to find a medrash that would use psukim from the parsha and the haftorah. You know how, like, also learning medrash is its own little bit of skill that I picked up, because a lot of times people just go to like the bottom line, the message, right, of the medrash, and ignore the psukim. Because yeah, psukim, whatever. But the truth is, in order to actually understand what Chazal is saying, you have to not only look at the psukim, you have to open them and look at the context. Because a lot of times they'll refer to a famous pasuk in a parak, but they refer to the message of the entire parak. But in any case, when I see a medrash that has, you know, that makes its point by putting together the parsha and the haftorah, that's when I know I need to look at what the message is, and perhaps use that to write something,
right.
something meaningful.
The rabbis in the midrash presume that we didn't
Absolutely
know that verse, but knew the verses that
they expected us to know the whole thing cold. We don't, but at least we have books we can open, so it's all right.
Right.
So that's one thing I did. Another one is a lot of times I didn't find that. So I used the same methodology as they used. Words and phrases that are rare, that appear in both. And sometimes I've had situations where you have like a nice chunky phrase that is only used in the Parsha and only in Haftorah and no other places. And then you say, okay, you put that together, and where does that take us? Actually, and some of the connections were actually more difficult, required a little bit more creativity on my part. And I really feel that it's Siyata D'Shmai here. The truth is, even when it's something obvious and there's a medrash, to be able to go from that and say, okay, but what do we actually get out of it? What does that message mean to us? Because again, it's talking to us. Often that was a challenge. The Yetze is just a challenge up and down. I don't know if you want me to talk about that or something else.
Yeah, perhaps just for a few minutes. I'd love to hear your thoughts.
Mm-hmm. So first of all, Vayetze is one of the haftorahs where there's a discrepancy between Sephardi and Ashkenazi. There's actually a remarkable amount of uniformity. This one isn't. The book is Ashkenaz because I didn't have the strength to do the others as well.
When you say the bush the haftarah choices that you comment on reflect Ashkenazic practice.
That's right. Ashkenazi practice of our shul, what we find in the Koran Siddur. Sorry, that's I had to do something. But it just looks like it's one of the ones that look like the only connection is the fact that it starts with similar words, right? It starts with Vayivrach Yaakov Sde Aram, which is, Yaakov fled to the land of Aram, which is how our parsha starts. So, okay, that's nice. Now you're done. I mean, that's the connection. It starts in the same place. So I had to work really, and I did not find Midrashim, at least not directly, not as wonderfully prepackaged with a bow on top, like some of them. But what I did, so I drew something that had always troubled me, right? And that is in fact the theme in the Haftorah. One of the things that the Haftorah talks about is how should I put this politely? I don't want to say bad things about the Jewish people, right?
Well,
the prophet can, but I can't.
You can read it. We have it here.
You have it here. So no, but that's the prophet talking. That's not me. So one of the ways to interpret. By the way, it was incredible. The commentators all have different approaches as to how to even read the first few verses. Who is speaking? when they stop speaking and the next person starts speaking, it's very, very difficult. And the more opinions you have in the commentary, the less likely you are to find, the one and only true shot, right? So I picked one. I picked the one that I thought was the most defensible, the easiest to relate to, the one that I felt made the points that were consistent with the rest of the Haftorah, and that is that the Jewish people look at Yaakov at a certain point, and they say, "Look, Yaakov was a very shrewd businessman. He took advantage of people. He took advantage of their weaknesses. We should, not only can we do that, we should do that. We want to be like Yaakov Avinu." And then the Navi turns around and says, this is toward the end though, he says, the ways of Hashem are straight. Yesharim derkei Hashem. The righteous walk on them, but the crooked stumble upon them, which is a very, very difficult pasuk also. Like from a philosophical point of view, wait a second, God gave us the Torah, and you're saying that it is possible for a person to keep the Torah, to learn the Torah, and come out crooked. Because that's what the verse says.
Well,
Yes.
the verse says, "Ki yisharim darchei Hashem tzadikim yelchu bam, posh'im yichnu." Okay, they can stumble on them.
Okay, so the possibility exists.
Right.
There exists a possibility that what we see as Darkei Hashem, or even we say the Torah as a whole, and that's one of the commentaries descriptions, and people are capable of using them in such a way as to cause the opposite of what the Ribono Shel Olam intended, what God intended. So, I mean, there are this verse is used by Chazal a lot in a lot of things. So then we have that, and we have Yaakov, who is the midah of emet, titen emet liYaakov, truth, right? We say Yaakov represents truth. Well, that's very hard to understand given his life and the stories that he's in.
Just for a second, not to challenge, and I know Fred Yosef, it's wonderful. Titen emet liYaakov could easily be read as give Yaakov some truth because
he needs it.
Right. So, and what happens often is the mystical teachings which ascribe certain values, biblical personalities, are often overlaid on verses which could be read in multiple
Absolutely
ways.
Nothing to do with them. That's
all
right.
of a sudden, you're saying Yaakov is truth, and then we have a problem, which is a valid reading, but
Right.
it's not the only reading.
No, it's not the only reading, which is why I didn't actually bring that verse there. I'm actually talking from the point of view of our tradition and our understanding of culture. In our understanding of Torah, it is fairly, it is the value that we, on the whole, ascribe to Yaakov. I mean, the truth is, it's not everybody, right? But okay, fine, never mind that. The question remains, he's one of our forefathers, it's somebody that we respect and we look up to, given that, right? So then, right? So how, what are we saying that the people in Ephraim, the northern kingdom, were right when they said, oh, well, if he could cheat and steal from everybody, so can we. Not steal, manipulate, make very good business decisions of the non-Jews. So would we say that our forefather Yaakov, he was like that and therefore we should be like that? So clearly there's something else. So I took a different medrash that I think is somewhat well known about how emet is not truth with a capital T, is not something that could survive in this world. And it talks about the creation of truth and how human beings can't always perceive what the world ought to be. And sometimes in order to create what ought to be, what is really, really true, we might have to manipulate things a little bit. And then the distinguishing factor ends up being, though, humility, actually. Because Yaakov, if Yaakov had been out to become wealthy, then we would say he was doing this for himself. But Yaakov says in the beginning of this week's parsha, all he's asking for is lechem lechol and beged lilbosh, just to have basic food, basic protection, and he doesn't need God to give him all anything beyond that. Um, and when your intentions are pure, there is a possibility of being able to do the kinds of things that Yaakov did. If your intentions are not pure, then then you shouldn't even. You should be very, very careful. Well, okay, if your intentions are not pure, you should. They're not pure. You're not going to be careful. But people whose intentions are pure, are not pure, and they try to do these things. That's that's the pushlim yikashlubam, right? That's the crooked stumble upon them. God, it's fine. It's good. I'm following halacha.
Okay, let me interrupt you just for a second, but I heard you just as you completed that sentence. What I suggest we do is wrap up. It's been a really, really great conversation. Thank you for giving us a sense not just of what you've done in this book, but also what led you to write it and the thoughtfulness that's expressed within it, the thoughtfulness of words, of language, of trying to achieve a sense of timeless message using the words of today, of the way in which you've tried to incorporate midrashim and use them to create associations between the parasha and Haftarah. And I personally can say that I'm somebody who, truth be told, turned off a little bit during the Haftarah. I listened, but not always with 100% attention. And now with Haftorah Unrolled, I'm listening much, much better, because I'm realizing that it's not just somebody reading something. These are words that are talking to us. And yes, they need a little bit of translation along the way. That's true. As you say, sometimes the words in the beam are hard to understand and have multiple readings. But what you've done is give us that real life translation. And what I may do, I generally don't do this here in my community, but I would strongly suggest that people not just have a copy for their home, but also one in shul, that they can read this as after as read and get a great sense of what's being read and appreciation that it's speaking to them, to their community, and to the world in general. So thank you very, very, very much.
Thank you. Thank you for your time and for your very kind words and for your encouragement. And please, I hope whoever does get this book and open it and use it, I hope that they enjoy it and it enriches their Shabbat.